BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And later in the program, I will be joined by Sam Fisher. He is the author of the Zodiac Killer Identity, and he will be talking to us all about his suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin. I will also be looking at possible solutions to the Z32 cipher and the map code, and responding to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and their new video on the Zodiac Hoax theory. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. To begin, I would like to talk about Jimmy Akin's new video. In 2024, he released a multi-part series on the Zodiac Killer, which was somewhat of a general introduction looking at the facts of the case and some of the widely discussed Zodiac Killer suspects. And one more time, his channel is called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And he has launched a new series on the Zodiac Killer Hoax theory, the idea that the serial killer from 1968 and 69 was not a single individual, but rather somebody was writing letters taking credit for murders that he did not commit. The name of Jimmy Akin's new series is The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, which very clearly is discussing the book of that name by Thomas Henry Horn, as well as the Peacock documentary, which featured Thomas Horn and explored his theory. Now, I'm going to play a clip in just a second. It is about 2 minutes long, and it is going to discuss some of the points of the Zodiac hoax theory. And Jimmy Akin was very clear that he is launching a multi-part series. And overall, though, I think that the criticisms that they made of the hoax theory were not very strong. Many of you know that I've talked about this a lot in the past. It is not my preferred theory. It is not one that I endorse. It's not even my go-to theory or a top 5 theory. But if someone is going to challenge or criticize the theory, I think that they should first be able to understand it as well as articulate all of the reasons why they do not believe that the Zodiac Killer was a single person. And also, if they're going to challenge it, first they should demonstrate a very clear comprehension of the hoax theory. I'm going to play this clip, and then I'm going to respond.
Have prima facie evidence linking the first 3 crimes. All involved the same victimology. In the first, second, and third attacks, the victims were a pair of young people in a fairly secluded location who were seemingly having a romantic encounter. At least that's how it would have appeared to the killer, so he would be targeting the same kinds of victims. We also have prima facie evidence linking the second, third, and fourth crimes. Nobody survived or saw the first crime, but in the latter crimes, the witnesses described the killer in a way that converges on a white male adult, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, stockily built, with light brown hair of varying length, who at least sometimes wore glasses. In addition, we have a phone call placed after the second crime, and it claimed credit for the first and second crimes. We also have a phone call after the third crime, in which the caller claimed credit for the third crime. This call also noted that Brian and Cecilia had arrived in a Volkswagen Karmann Ghia, and when the authorities found the Karmann Ghia, the door had a written message claiming credit for the first 3 crimes. During this attack, the killer also wore the Zodiac symbol on his costume. In addition, we have 2 letters sent after the second crime. Both the first and the second letters claim credit for the first 2 crimes, and they provide details about them that were not generally known. The first letter used the Zodiac symbol, and the second letter used both the symbol and the name Zodiac. And after the fourth crime, we have another letter. This third letter claims credit for the Paul Stein murder, providing a torn piece of his shirt as evidence. It also uses both the Zodiac symbol and the Zodiac name. Combining the number of links that we have to each of the 4 crimes, there are 5 links connecting to the first crime, 6 links connecting to the second crime, 4 links connecting to the third crime, and 2 links connecting to the fourth crime. We also have 4 uses of the Zodiac symbol and 2 uses of the Zodiac name. All of this is ignoring later alleged Zodiac communications and focusing only on those known to have happened during the 4 crimes and the first 2 days after the last of these crimes. The numbers would go up even further if we included later alleged communications from the Zodiac, but we're keeping things confined to just these for the moment.
And one more time, that was from Jimmy Akin's channel, Mysterious World. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Some of the points in there are rather interesting when they're looking at all of the frequency of the usage of the word Zodiac, the frequency of the usage of the Zodiac symbol, as well as how the victimology is very similar. And they're looking at all these points that might indicate that there was a single serial killer who operated in California in 68 and 69, as opposed to different unconnected murders where someone was writing letters taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit. But I cannot ask Thomas Horan about that. He seems to have deleted all of his social media. However, I think I know what he would say. It doesn't matter how many frequent uses of the word Zodiac you have, or the uses of the symbol that you have, no matter how many, that does not rule out the hoax theory. That does not cancel out the hoax theory, because it does not eliminate the possibility that someone was just using that symbol and using that name to try and fool people. And as for victimology, I think that there are so many stronger points that they could raise that would actually challenge the hoax theory. And, it's a very long presentation. It's over an hour long. And they were also very clear that they were going to make a multi-part series on the Zodiac hoax theory, and in their second episode, Jimmy Akin stated that he was going to do something called the steel man. And when you steel man somebody's argument, it's when you're speaking on their behalf, and you're trying to articulate it on their behalf, and I think that that would be so much better for them to do first, before they challenge the hoax theory, because everything you heard in that clip really does not challenge the statement at all. It's still possible. Some of the other criticisms that were mentioned in this hour-long presentation were that, number 1, Thomas Horan wrote a book called The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, which is a combination of his previous writings. The first section of that book is called The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986, and it mostly talks about challenging the statements that were made by Robert Graysmith, author of the 86 book Zodiac, hence the name The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986. That is the first Zodiac Killer book that I ever discussed for this channel, so of course that always stands out to me when somebody brings it up. And when he was bringing that up, he's saying that, okay, Thomas Horan is challenging Robert Graysmith, but who cares? Why is it important that somebody is going to criticize Robert Graysmith, who wrote the most famous book on the case? And I think, though, Thomas Horan actually did a reasonable service with that one. Why does he have this stuff out there? Why did he write The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986? Well, Thomas Horan was very clear about that everybody got their contemporary understanding of the Zodiac Killer from Graysmith's book. And he would say this in his interviews, that if you were to watch a documentary or listen to a podcast or watch a YouTube video or see somebody on TV talking about the Zodiac Killer, they got their understanding of the case from Graysmith's book. Now, is that true? No, absolutely not. And he even debated Druser on Planet X Filmworks once, and Druser openly told him, "Do you know how offensive it is when you say that?" Of course that's not true, but it's hyperbole. It's an extreme exaggeration to draw attention to a point that Graysmith was very influential, and also, Graysmith was not accurate, he was not factual. Robert Graysmith took a lot of creative liberties with his 1986 book, and Jimmy Akin's like, well, why bring this up? Because Thomas Horan's claim is that it becomes very apparent that Robert Graysmith had access to the files, and when he's writing his Zodiac narrative, he's almost writing a sentence that is half true and half false, meaning that he knew he was putting false information into his book, thus distorting the historical narrative. So the first thing you have to do is unlearn all of the ideas that Robert Graysmith has shared, and that all of the disinfo that he has shared before you can start looking at the facts of the case. Next, Jimmy Akin also brought up one very odd challenge to Thomas Horan. He also said this very frequently in his interviews, that one thing people have to recognize is that there were good suspects in all of the Zodiac crimes. There were suspects other than just the quote-unquote Zodiac Killer, particularly at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. And I think, though, Jimmy Akin really overshot it when he said in his video, okay, well, if there were good suspects in these crimes, then they would have been convicted, or at the very least arrested, and ultimately, no, I disagree with that completely. There can be multiple suspects in a crime, and there can also be suspects that appear like good suspects to the authorities, and they don't all get convicted. They don't all get arrested. But there can be people who are under suspicion, under surveillance, and they are suspects in the crimes, and they might even seem like reasonable suspects. Just because somebody is a suspect does not mean that they will be arrested or convicted. I have to push back on that one as well. But Jimmy Akin did actually give a very solid criticism of the myth of the Zodiac Killer. I repeat, a solid criticism that was pretty good. If you read the book, and I could tell that Jimmy has because of the way he's talking about it, if you read the book, you'll really find that the hoax theory is not encapsulated in any type of summary. It's spread out through the duration of the book, and sometimes it's not completely clear where the theory starts and ends, and also the actual explanations are just scattered throughout the pages of the myth of the Zodiac Killer, and it's up to the reader to try and put everything together. Once again, I've done 2 book discussions on this, on the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986 and the Myth of the Zodiac Killer, although they're done in the old-fashioned podcast format, but they're still here on this channel if people are curious. But I would also just like to take Jimmy's statement and go one step further, and that is to say that sometimes the theory is not completely clear. But I can even offer one thing that's going to tie in very, very neatly to Jimmy's previous criticism, when he says if there were good suspects in these cases, why weren't they arrested? Why weren't they convicted? Thomas Horan has been so loud about that, and even talks about this in his book, when he says that he believes that with the first 2 crimes, Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, there were confidential informants who were involved, protected informants who were involved, and the authorities knew that they weren't going to arrest anyone because, number 1, they didn't want to compromise their own investigations in other cases, number 2, they didn't want to deal with the liabilities, and number 3, in some of his older interviews, he would just state very clearly that when you have a lot of unsolved cases from the past, frequently it deals with covering up the actions and activities of confidential informants. Okay, though, but my challenge to anybody is, well, if that's the case, then who's the confidential informant at Lake Herman Road? Who is it? And, I mean, I think that this is, connecting to Jimmy Akin's criticism, again, very solidly, in a solid manner. Who's the confidential informant at Lake Herman Road? Was it David Faraday, the victim, or was it the shooter? Because it's not completely clear in the hoax theory. Remember, David Faraday is involved with ratting somebody out for drugs, and some people think that he was killed in retaliation for the drug-related connection, but Thomas Horan also talks about the possibility that the shooter could have been somebody who was a protected informant, and he even identifies David Walliott as the suspect, but maybe it was Russell Ott, maybe it was a different person completely altogether. It's not completely clear who the shooter was at Lake Herman Road, as well as who the informant was. Was it somebody who was working for the police who was an actual criminal? Or was it 17-year-old David Faraday who's ratting people out for drugs, and then he was killed because he was an informant? It's like there are these 2 elements of the story that are just stitched together, and I'm not really sure which one of them would be the more plausible one in the hoax theory. Then you get to Blue Rock Springs, and more or less I think he was pretty clear in the past that he believed that Darlene Ferrin was the confidential informant, and that she actually went to Blue Rock Springs to buy drugs, and Officer Richard Hoffman was patrolling the area prior to the shooting, and she was actually planning to set up her ex-husband Jim Phillips Crabtree, but he showed up with somebody else, and the drug dealer could have retaliated and shot them, or Jim Phillips Crabtree could have been the shooter. And Richard Hoffman is also discussed as a possible shooter in the myth of the Zodiac Killer. But once again, who's the shooter? It's not completely clear. And then once you get to Lake Berryessa, the third crime, everything just goes off the rails. And it's really just an absolute mess as to try and figure out what happened. Because for a while, Thomas Horan is saying that it was a copycat, that this was not even part of the drug-related murders, the confidential informant murders. This was somebody who learned about the Zodiac persona from the papers that had been written, where, again, a prank caller called in and said, I'm responsible for the murders of the you find two kids in a brown car, they were shot with a 9mm Luger, I'm the one who did it, goodbye, that thing. Okay, that person called it in as a prank. That was just somebody listening to the police radio. They called that in. Then somebody wrote letters in the paper stating that they were the murderer. 3 weeks after the phone call, somebody started pretending to be the killer via the letters. And that is the true birth of the hoax theory. Then in August of 1969, you have the name Zodiac used and the symbol, all published in the papers. And then somebody could have read that and would have had 5 weeks to prepare Lake Berryessa, as well as practicing their handwriting. And that Lake Berryessa was a copycat, somebody who learned about it from the papers, who was wearing the symbol, wrote the symbol on the car door to try and commit a double homicide and pass it off as that of the Zodiac Killer, right? Well, except at the same time, he also accused Dennis Land, the park ranger, who was the first ranger on site, of being the Lake Berryessa stabber, except he didn't state that he was a copycat. He stated that he was an active participant, and this was all planned because he had a connection to the person who wrote the Zodiac Killer letters. And I'm like, whoa, now wait a second. Is this a lone wolf copycat, or is this somebody who's part of a larger interconnected operation? That stuff is not clear. Once again, there are these two different ideas that get stitched together, and Jimmy Akin's criticism is mostly solid in that regards, that they're just these ideas that are scattered about where we have to connect the dots. And then ultimately we'll get to the Stein murder, and everybody thinks that the biggest challenge to the Stein murder is that a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt was mailed in after the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver. Well, okay, I mean, I totally accept that that's a criticism, but Thomas Horan has addressed that very clearly. He states that an active participant stole it and provided it to the person whom he believes wrote the letters, which was Hal Snook. Now, I think that it would be so much better once I get to hear Jimmy Akin's video where he will steelman the hoax theory and actually try to provide some criticisms of it. After he has completely articulated all of the points, he completely glossed over the confidential informant aspect of this and the drug-related murders. But I said very clearly in my book discussions in the past, that would really mean that only the first two crimes were actually hoaxes. And then by the summer of 1969, or to be clear, it's actually the fall, September 27th, Lake Berryessa is the fall. By the fall of 1969, the hoax theory is no longer a hoax. It's taken on a life of its own. But really, that the first two crimes were drug-related or gang-related murders, and then somebody wrote letters trying to convince people that there was this boogeyman type of serial killer on the loose. Well, I would love to see what he's going to say in response to that, so some of his criticisms I felt were invalid and unjust, and that final criticism, though, about how the hoax theory is just scattered all over the place, that one I felt was defendable. But you guys can let me know what you think. You can also drop your ideas in the comment section down below. What do you think about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory? Have you watched the Myth of the Zodiac Killer documentary? Have you read the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, by Thomas Henry Horan? And I invite you to check out some of my older episodes on the hoax theory. It was something that I was very fascinated with back in 2019 and 2020. And even into 2021, really, I found that in the spring of 2021, I was still spending a lot of time reading about the hoax theory and learning more about the participants that were involved. Lots of episodes about it here on BBOR. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. But I told you in this episode that I wanted to talk about the Z32 cipher as well as the map code, because I mean, the reason why I'm differentiating between them is the Zodiac Killer's final unconfirmed cipher is called the Z32. It has 32 symbols, and only 3 of them repeat: the letter C, the letter O, and the triangle. And this is something that is connected to the map. The Zodiac was very clear when he said, this code, coupled with the map, will tell you the location of a bomb. Then he said, P.S. it concerns radians and inches along the radians. And firstly, I would like to give a shout out to Rob, who sent this in to the Facebook page. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there is also a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page. But Rob says that I may have solved the map. Would you mind taking a look? If you rotate the crosshairs and put the 0 to the 45 mark, which is near the magnetic north, and the 9 goes to 135 degrees over the chart, laying the radians chart with the map, 135 goes to Blue Rock Springs. I don't want anyone trying to claim this if it's true. I think he means I don't know if anyone's trying to claim this if it's true. But in terms of the radians, what is he talking about? The Zodiac first stated that you need to set your compass to magnetic north, which means that you need to adjust by 17 degrees. And when you put radians in a circle, you create something what is called the unit circle. And as I understand, the first person to identify the similarities between the unit circle and the Zodiac Killer's own crosshair symbol was Douglas Evander Oswell, who wrote the book The Unabomber and the Zodiac. And a radian is an angle of 57.29 degrees approximately, and you can arrange them in a circle, and when you do, it resembles the Zodiac Killer's symbol. And what Rob is saying is that if you were to follow the Zodiac's instructions, then you're going to have 0, 3, 6, and 9. And it really is quite odd that the Zodiac chose to use these numbers, because if this is a compass, it's a pretty bad compass, because he could have also written north, south, east, and west for the compass rose. Some people call it the clock face, but as Michael Cole points out very clearly, this isn't really a clock face. A clock face should be 12, 3, 6, 9, not 0, 3, 6, 9. But when you adjust this, what Rob is saying is that 9 is going to come up, and then it's going to be on the 135 degree mark, which is 3 pi over 4 radians, and that will go to Blue Rock Springs Park. If anything, that shows that there is another interconnected mathematical observation about the Zodiac Killer. And then you also have this one where you would have the 6 going to 225 degrees. I mean, like, that's what he says here. So if you put 0 at 45 degrees, the 6 will go to 225, which is 5 pi over 4 radians. And if anything, this is just showing some interconnected mathematical observations. But I was saying, okay, so this is about the location of a bomb. Are you trying to say that the Zodiac Killer had Blue Rock Springs Park as the location of his bomb? And Rob responded by saying, maybe, but he also could have just been trying to see what people were going to do, keep them searching for something that was a giant waste of time. And this could also be the Zodiac trolling. The exact words are, he could have went back and planted a bomb, or just wanted police to waste time back in that area. One more time, I really do thank Rob for sharing this observation about the Zodiac Killer mystery. And there is another observation about the map code that I would like to share with you guys, and this one comes to us from David S. He sent this into the email address, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And David S. has his own take on the map code, as well as a solution to the Z32 cipher. And his solution to the map code is very interesting because it involves triangulation, if I'm using the term correctly. The Zodiac had multiple nights of activity, as we said, at Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, at Lake Berryessa, and at Presidio Heights. So, if we were to start at Mount Diablo, where the Zodiac Killer first directed us to use the Mount Diablo code, right? This concerns Mount Diablo and radians and inches along the radians. If you were to start at Mount Diablo, draw one line to Presidio Heights and one line to Lake Berryessa, you would create a triangle. Then, if you were to go to the absolute center of the triangle, you could make another triangle that's going to go to the 2 sites that have not been included. You would have Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. Now, it isn't a perfect equilateral triangle. I think that I think David is very well aware of that, but he's still saying that this could almost work out. It's a near equilateral triangle, and it almost works out very neatly. But then you make this triangle with the epicenter of your first triangle, and you draw a smaller triangle within it, going to Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. Then you can bisect the triangle. You can cut it in half, and that will ultimately bring you to the direction of the bomb and the location of the bomb. And what's really interesting about this is that there is a location that is very close to this exact epicenter where the bomb would be located, and that is something that is also in the shape of a triangle called the Green Tree Anomaly. Remember, the Zodiac C32 cipher has the three repeating symbols, the C, the O, and the triangle. And big triangle, small triangle, geographic triangle, and the exact solution to his that he proposes for the C32 cipher is in 3 3/8 radians 10. And he has a paper that he has shared online on GitHub about the Zodiac Z32 cipher, which is now in the public domain. I mean, I think that this is fascinating because this one is also not beyond belief. I don't think that this is overly complicated. I don't think it's outrageous. I think that he has identified a very specific location, and also he's using the code. He's using Mount Diablo, and he is using radians, and he's also using the inches along the radians, but it's really pointing toward some very specific locations using the Zodiac Killer solution. And, I mean, if you were to bisect the triangle and go to the exact coordinates that he is talking about here, I think that this could work. In 3 3/8 radians 10. And the one more time, the exact thing that you would want to do is to bisect the triangle or make a divisive thing on the triangle going from Blue Rock Springs to 1.15 miles to the middle of this new triangle that we've created, and that would be the exact location of the bomb. So, fascinating stuff. You guys can let me know what you think about any of these possible solutions to the Zodiac Killer's Z32 cipher. Now, as many of you will know, that I've had Paul Brookbanks on the channel recently, and he was talking about his own solution to the Z32, and Alex Baber of the Killer in the Code podcast also was somebody who arrived at the same solution, and that was estimate 4 radians and 3 inches, and it was one that went to the Oakland, California area, and I guess we can call it the Baber-Brookbanks solution, one that 2 individuals from different sides of the earth came up with independently. And I still think that that might be my top one, because that does not necessarily identify a single plot of land. That one is something that just points toward the Oakland area, more or less. There could be numerous places within that sphere that would also work for the solution, whether it's the Oakland Coliseum or the Mountain View Cemetery, and something like that I think actually fits in very nicely with what the Zodiac Killer is doing. I don't believe the Zodiac had a physical bomb. I think that he was simply trolling. I think he was lying. I think that he's doing something about what Rob said, getting people to waste time, and this would point people toward the Oakland area, and the bomb is just somewhere in the Oakland area, and you have until the fall to dig it up. I think it was an empty threat, and I don't think that it had any real value. But out of all of these possible solutions, which one stands out the most to you? I guess I'm still going with the Baber-Brookbanks solution, and this might be one of the stronger points that came out of the Killer in the Code podcast. Tom Voigt of ZodiacKiller.com released a new post, and he just openly stated that he more or less is calling Alex Baber a fraud. I think that the Z32 solution is credible and defendable, but anything in regards to Alex Baber's suspect, Marvin Margolis, is mostly not credible and not defendable. But right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one goes to Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the research for this program. Black Box Online Radio comes to you Monday through Friday talking about unsolved mysteries. Feel free to start your day with some mystery talk in the morning. On Mondays about the Zodiac Killer, on Tuesdays about JonBenet Ramsey, on Wednesdays about Jack the Ripper, on Thursdays about the Black Dahlia, and on Fridays about D.B. Cooper. I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday about true crime news, serial killers, and anything under the sun or in the darkness. But yes, Zodiac Monday is where you will get your shoutouts, although I'm going to be giving shoutouts in other places on the channel, but I'll talk about that in just a second, because our next one is going to River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. I really do appreciate everything that you've done for Black Box Online Radio over the years, and I also have to give a giant general shout out to everybody, because Black Box Online Radio has now reached 6,000 subscribers, and I'm going to share something with you guys in just a second. But I have another buymeacoffee.com shout out that I would like to give, and this one is anonymous, but it was done on buymeacoffee.com, and it just says, "Thanks for the Cooper news." And I really recognize that some people follow this channel only for Cooper Friday. I mean, some of you guys only do for Zodiac Monday, and that's fine, right? I talk about multiple unsolved mysteries, and Zodiac Monday and Cooper Friday, and if somebody is a specific DB Cooper listener, I'm also going to be giving shout-outs on Cooper Friday for Black Box Online Radio, to this person here, for example. But yes, indeed, Black Box Online Radio has reached 6,000 subscribers. And I couldn't do it without you guys. I really could not do it without the listeners, followers, and subscribers to this program. And I'm going to share something with you guys here. I was recently contacted by one of those internet consultants, and I get contacted by these guys a lot. You know, they're saying that they wanted to provide services for the channel, and of course they want to charge money for it. And one of them contacted me and said, "Hey, we would like to work with you. We think you have a good idea, you know, with the unsolved mysteries, mystery talk in the morning and all that. We would like to do some things." And I'm like, okay, well, what type of services are you looking to have for the channel? And they said, well, you know, we would like to pre-write your episodes, you know, write the scripts. I'm like, well, I kind of do everything unscripted, but I'll hear you out. And then they're like, okay, and we would also like to edit the videos. I'm like, yeah, that's definitely something I'd be curious about hearing more of. And then they're saying, we also have a team of voiceover artists that we would like to use. And I'm just sitting back and thinking, whoa, now wait a second. You want to pre-write my episodes, you want to edit my episodes, and you want to use your own voiceover artists. So what else is there on a channel like Black Box Online Radio? I mean, seriously, what else is there? That would pretty much be saying that you want me to give you money to kick me out of my own show, and then you're going to pre-write the episodes, edit the episodes, and have your own voiceover artist? Well, I don't necessarily know if that's exactly what I'm planning to do with Black Box Online Radio, but I would also like to see more, and they said that they would do something for free. And they just asked me to talk for 5 minutes about something, and I was thinking, you know what, I guess that I can talk for 5 minutes, and I decided to choose the Zodiac Killer's Exorcist letter as one that I was going to be talking about, and I was just thinking that I could do it off the top of my head, and I'm going to share with you guys as a special celebration for the 6,000 subscribers of Black Box Online Radio, 6,000 subscriber edition. This isn't exactly the reward that I planned on sharing for you guys or the celebration, but this is what they wanted to do. Have a look. The Zodiac Killer was an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. But the Zodiac Killer also wrote letters and ciphers, and the letters continued regularly into 1971. Then there is what is called the Halton Zodiac activity for 1972 and 1973. Now, it's possible that the Zodiac was writing letters during this time frame, but all of that is unconfirmed. However, in January of 1974, the Zodiac wrote something called the Exorcist Letter, and this is widely believed to be a genuine communication from the Zodiac Killer, breaking a 2-year silence. No letters in 72, no letters in 73. Then the Zodiac writes a letter again in 1974, And the Exorcist letter is as follows. I saw and think The Exorcist is the best satirical comedy ever. Signed, yours truly. P.S. If I don't see this note in your paper, I'll do something nasty which you know I'm capable of. The Zodiac also included a quotation from the operetta musical The Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan, which states, "He plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Titwillow, titwillow, titwillow." And if anything, it shows that the Zodiac Killer may have been committing murders in 1968 and 69, continuing to write his letters and play his little mind games with the police, the media, and the general public, all the way to 1971, and then, for some reason, he just doesn't act in 1972 and 73, then he wants to recreate everything with the 1974 letter, bring back the Zodiac persona, although he did not use the name Zodiac, and he used the term suicide's grave, which is a reference to the Mikado. So some people think that the Exorcist letter was created to put an end to the Zodiac Killer's persona, where he's saying, I was the Zodiac in the past, now I am no longer the Zodiac. There are a bunch of different ideas that are in the Exorcist letter. It is perhaps one of the most fascinating Zodiac communications, and there are still people who doubt its authenticity to this day, but I am not one of them. So they sent that back to me, and I'm just thinking, wow. They're like, well, what do you think? And I was thinking, I look like a giant white raisin. You guys made me look like an enormous white raisin. But, yeah, your edits are pretty good. However, what they were asking for in terms of money would be not only more than my entire revenue for a month here on Black Box Online Radio, it would be exponentially more than an entire month's revenue here on Black Box Online Radio. I simply couldn't do that. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. I don't want to be a white raisin and just have, all of these details magnified on the screen. And there's some things that I really do like about working with Black Box Online Radio. And they said talk for 5 minutes, so I decided to choose the Zodiac Killer's Exorcist letter. Now, some of you may notice some imperfections with that. I always do this when I'm trying to quote the Exorcist letter. It's, I saw and think The Exorcist is the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. Signed, yours truly. Then it goes to the Mikado quote, he plunged himself into the billowy wave and an echo arose from the suicide's grave, titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. Then it says, P.S. If I don't see this note in your paper, I'll do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of. Okay, I think that might be a little bit more accurate. And in the second minute there, they really just took a lot of my words out of order, and they just kind of put it together. But that was purely a sample of showing what they're capable of. And yes, I totally admit that it looks very professional. I don't look my best on the screen, but that has more to do with genetics and dietary issues, as opposed to any of their editing. They didn't turn me into a giant white raisin. I suppose that biology and aging did. But I think that that's where it shall stand. And anyway, thank you so much to that team for creating that sample for Black Box Online Radio. And just a couple more quick shout-outs very fast. We have one super chat that came in, or super thanks rather, from Professor Chad. That's Dr. Chad Galuska, who left one on Jack the Ripper's episode, Ripper Wednesday, that featured my interview with Steve Blomer, author of Inside Bucks Row. Thank you so much to Dr. Chad. And also, we have one that I would like to give to Quentin Broom, who recommended the Jack Rosewood books to me. And the Jack Rosewood books talk all about serial killers, and they've been worked into a lot of the YouTube shorts. Thank you so much to Quentin Broom. And this next one is done purely in honor of Batman 66. And that is that you heard that thing in the Exorcist letter there, about how it says, he plunged himself into the billowy wave and an echo arose from the suicide's grave, titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. Well, a lot of people point out that that's not actually a Mikado quotation. The Zodiac tried to quote the Mikado, but he didn't do it very well. The line is, oh, willow, titwillow, titwillow. And I have to give full credit to Justice, who said this on the Zodiac Theory channel, that it doesn't seem like the Zodiac Killer was a performer. He quotes the Mikado very frequently in his letters, but it doesn't seem like he was a stage performer because the way that he says things would not scan to the music, or it wouldn't be the way a vocalist would try to sing them. But I happened to find one thing, and again, this is purely done in honor of Batman 66. I started watching the 1966 Batman program in the clip versions. I don't have time for full length episodes, but on YouTube they have lots of clips and even reels. And I just happened to be watching, and they told the story of the Batman villain, the Penguin, who was played by Burgess Meredith, who also played Mickey Goldmill in the Rocky movies, and he was in Clash of the Titans. And Burgess Meredith is playing the villain, and the Penguin decides to stage a wedding and rob his own wedding. And Batman and Robin are like, what kind of man would rob his own wedding? And then it cuts to the Penguin driving away, and he's singing, "The bachelor's life is a life for me, titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. Oh, the bachelor's life is a life for me, titwillow, titwillow, titwillow." And he's just singing that as he's escaping from his own wedding, which I'm sure is just filled with humorous sentiment. But at the same time, I couldn't help but think about the Exorcist letter. And the thing I will share with you is, when the Zodiac Killer altered the words from the Mikado to from "Oh Willow Titwillow" to "Titwillow Titwillow," was he quoting the Batman episode from 1966 featuring the Penguin robbing his own wedding? I have no idea. I'm not able to make that type of precise observation and determination. But what this does show us is these ideas were expressed during the contemporary times, in the contemporary parlance, and it's also gone throughout different types of media. Yes, Titwillow, Titwillow, Titwillow is shared in the Exorcist letter. Maybe it was taken from the Batman episode. Maybe there's a different piece of media out there altogether that was using this alternative quotation. Maybe the Zodiac was quoting the Mikado, but he just got it wrong because of his memory and so on. I mean, a lot of people do think that. The whole point is, these ideas are much more prevalent in the 1960s and 70s than a lot of people have originally given them credit for. And this goes to show us that most of what the Zodiac Killer is doing is not some type of brilliant masterwork. I think he knew a lot about codes, he knew a fair amount about math, but still, I'm not convinced that the Zodiac was a genius. I don't think he had a genius level IQ, and especially not when he's sharing book references and musical references and possibly TV references. These were just the stuff that were around him. These were the things that were around him when he was growing up and also living his adult life. And it wasn't abnormal to hear these things, and then he puts them in a letter. It's so ordinary. Yes, the Zodiac had some strong points. Math a little bit and codes a little bit. However, he was also just an ordinary person who maybe had nobody to talk to about his common interests. Let me know what you think about anything that has been discussed, and thank you once again to the supporters of from buymeacoffee.com, as well as all of the subscribers. And now, I'm going to bring Sam Fisher onto the program, and he's going to be talking to us all about his Zodiac Killer suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin. So, let's welcome Sam to Black Box Online Radio. He is the author of The Zodiac Killer Identity, and he's going to be talking to us all about his Zodiac Killer suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin. And because Sam has been a guest in the past, he is going to provide us with some updates on his research. Sam, how are you doing?
Good. How's everything going, Ned?
I'm doing just fine. Now, it's been quite a while since you've been a guest on Black Box Online Radio, so perhaps we can start from the beginning. Joseph Paul Franklin is a name that maybe a lot of people wouldn't think about immediately when they're looking at the Zodiac Killer mystery. But you've done a lot of research into his life, and you have written several publications that are available online. So maybe we can start with the very beginning. And just for the audience, very briefly, can you tell us when you first began to look at Joseph Paul Franklin as a suspect? When did you first suspect him, and so on?
Yeah, that was I believe that was 2021. And how it came about was I was reading an article actually on the Golden State Killer, and what happened was it there was a hyperlink to the Zodiac Killer. So I clicked on it, and then when I read the gist of what had happened, I there was several things that I noticed about the Zodiac Killer. The symbol that he uses um, was also used by white supremacists, and some of the dates that he had used to mail his letters, such as the Z340, like the November 8th and 9th letter, along with the April 20th. Those are very significant dates in Nazi ideology. So the November 8th and 9th is a big celebration in Nazi circles of what they call the beer hall putsch. So, and they do celebrate those days. So that kind of struck me, but like I understand that there's still going to be some like coincidental, like is this information coincidental, right? So so I started that's when I started reading about a little bit more about the Zodiac Killer. Before that, I had somewhat I knew what the who the Zodiac Killer like was as a criminal. Like he was, to me, he was just somebody who killed people and wrote coded messages. So, but I didn't know really much more beyond that. And so when I started kind of researching that a little bit more, when I typed in just to see if anybody's name popped up, serial killer Nazi 1970s, then Joseph Paul Franklin's name came up. And so at the time, like I said, I didn't know anything about either one. Yeah, I didn't know anything about, I had never heard the name Joseph Paul Franklin before. I had never researched the Zodiac Killer. And so when I Googled his name, I noticed that there was also like an unsolved 18 characters at the end of the Z408. And then when I counted the letters of Joseph Paul Franklin, that was 18. And I know some people may say it was very naive, but at the time, like I really thought that that was like another major clue. And so that's where it all began. And the first sort of publication, I guess you could say, that I had put out was um, like quite honestly, it was absolutely just terrible, and I knew it was terrible. Like um, it was just a couple weeks long investigation and something that I had cooked up within a few hours and put that out on Amazon. But like I had absolutely no idea that there was going to be so much more information. And like uh the um I my intention actually was not to sell a book when I put that out. It was just to just kind of get like some basic things. And my thinking was that he was going to be crossed off pretty quickly by the Zodiac community, and that didn't happen. And I kept researching and kept kind of finding like little things that I thought were clues, and it just kept going and going. And that's that. So that was like kind of the start of it. So
All right, Sam, and I do thank you for that. But can you take us back to the very beginning of Zodiac activity? Why don't we begin with the Lake Herman Road murders, December 20th of
hmm
1968, the murders
yeah.
of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen,
So
and you can give us your analysis of that
hmm
crime and how it went down.
yeah. So what I'm gonna be doing is just putting it out there and just telling the audience like what I think happened and where, like, along with the timeline of the Zodiac murders, like where I think Joseph Paul Franklin was and what he was up to. So around that time in late 68, um his his whereabouts are for the most part very murky from what I've investigated. So I I realized that I can't prove that he was in California, but at the same time there's some smoke um and indications that he was not in Alabama where he should have been at that time. And so it becomes very difficult to sort of like pin down exactly where he was, because there's different accounts of his life story and where he was at. So for example, um, according to one book or report, he was married in 19, I think 68, early 1968, and in another account he was married in early 1969. Um, so as to his whereabouts during December of 1968, I really don't know. There's different accounts of what he was up to in his late teens. So I know that he had joined the Nazi Party, I believe in 67. Also in that same year, he was denied entry into, well, not entry, but like his dream was to become a police officer. But the problem was um, he's blind in his right eye, which later on we're going to have to circle back to this, getting back to the Lake Berryessa, because I have some interesting observations about that. But he was denied entry into the police force, or told that he couldn't join the police force at age 17 because he was blind in his right eye. So this, I'm thinking that this had triggered some sort of um, maybe crisis in his life where he was already part of the Nazi Party. So you're already talking about a very troubled young man. Um, ac- According to his ex-wife, I believe around this time, and this is according to the book, it was about the Rainbow Murders. They're actually in your home state, Ned, West Virginia. He had committed 2 murders there, and now a book written about that. The author did interview Franklin, and um, I believe interviewed his ex-wife, who also mentioned that around this time he would be gone for days at a time, doing what she described as secret agent things. Um, and they never sort of specified what that means. Now, somebody as dangerous as Joseph Paul Franklin, that you do have to question what exactly did he mean by he's off doing secret agent things, because that's different from an account that he told another friend later on in, I think, 1969, that he had spent time trucking, traveling the United States, right? So so he told a friend, like, I think at age 19, that he had already spent time trucking. So that tells me that he was out traveling the country, right? But I don't have the exact time frames of when he did this. So uh so although like I said, I can't prove that he was there in California, there's some indications that we don't really know where he was at. And somebody needs to go and talk to some of his old associates and kind of figure out what, what's the deal here. As best as I can determine, um, I know that he was most likely married in February of 1969. But I don't know where he was at in December, January. Interestingly, there is what I would call a person of interest who um, is named Jimmy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, like, there was a person of interest named Jimmy, which at the time his name was James. He went by Jimmy. So this incident happened, I believe it was probably early 1969. I'm guessing from the report, but and this is on Dion Walker's website. The Zodiac basement. There's like a police report that indicates that there was a suspect named Jimmy who this couple described him. This incident happened at the Red Roof Inn there in Vallejo, in which they described that there was somebody who looked like the sketch they put out after the Paul Stein murder. Well, this person named Jimmy said that they were a postal worker and had returned from the Vietnam War and was in a mental asylum or just whatever. And he had gotten very violent after hearing certain music on the radio that came over the jukebox. So I'm thinking that there's a chance that was him, just because, like, so, of course, like the name Jimmy, and at the time he went by Jimmy. He didn't go by Joseph Paul Franklin then. He went by Jimmy. So uh so yeah, that's kind of my commentary on that time frame. Any questions
But
on that, or?
yes, do you mind if I just share one thing for the listeners? When you're talking
Sure.
about not knowing his exact whereabouts, you've alluded to some
Right.
of that here. And because we've had some discussions in the past and I've
Mm-hmm.
looked at your material, Joseph Paul Franklin was a traveling serial killer. He was not
Yes,
based out of one location, right? So that's something that
correct. Yeah,
fuels your hypothesis, correct?
yeah, yeah. So you're talking about an incredibly mobile serial killer. So he was known to have, I think in later years, like he would kill in one state and show up 3 states away, committing other murders, and that's exactly how he operated in later years. In later years, he told his wife, whom like authorities are pretty sure that she had absolutely no idea that he was out committing all these murders and robbing banks. And he hid it very well by saying like he would always like sort of like create this lie that he had contracts, that he was a plumber. He had all these jobs in other states, and like you see the same pattern of like there's some smoke of the same pattern like in his late teens is my point. Like so what does that mean when he told his ex-wife around the time of the Zodiac murders that he was off doing secret agent things? Like what exactly does that mean? Right? So like I definitely think that we need to like somebody needs to look into that further at some point.
And what was his birth name?
James Clayton Vaughn Jr. was his birth name.
So that's how you get to Jimmy. That's the reason why he's using the name Jimmy from James. And
Yes, yeah. So I've seen interviews with his family, and they all refer to him as Jimmy.
okay, sure, very, very clear. All right, though. So we have the Lake Herman Road murders and what you
Hmm.
believe happened. Then
I
would you
what
also-
um I'm
go ahead.
I'm kind of leaning towards like I think that he stayed at some motel, and that's why you have a person of interest named Jimmy that pops up in a report later on, and that um I even though there's different accounts of when he got married, I tend to think that he got married in February of 69. So he goes back to Alabama to get married, and that marriage was very abusive. So that marriage only lasted 6 months until June of 69. In June of 69, um, his wife filed for divorce over basically due to like the extreme abuse. And then we get into the time frame of the July 4th murders, or the July 4th attack at Blue Rock Springs, right? So that somewhat, in my opinion, I think that that somewhat fits the time frame. So he that means that he would have somehow traveled all the way to California, committed the murders, come back in by February, married, got divorced by June, um, gone back for whatever reason back to the area, com- and then committed that attack. Now then it becomes a question of like where's he getting the money to do this? Well, in later years, he was robbing banks. So I've tried to sort of find if there was any bank robberies around that time, like anywhere across the United States, because like he could easily have robbed a bank in Kansas and headed off to California. So like I'm sort of that's where my trail kind of goes cold. Is like I don't I that's what I think. I think that he hung around the area somehow for until it was time to mail um his the Z408 into the newspapers. Um, so um, that's kind of what I'm thinking what happened. But um, I don't really know, or I can't confirm where he was at. I don't know if he was. I couldn't confirm that he was in Alabama or any of the southern states around that time. The next time that I can confirm where he popped up was in I think Louisiana State University in late August of 1969. But that the problem with that is that still would have given him time to, in theory, hung around California and then drive back easily to meet some friends down in Louisiana State University at the end of August of 69. Right. So, but that's I think I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let's back up into the to the ciphers. So after the attack at Blue Rock Springs, actually, no, let me back up a little bit. Like, Majot, like, and you can add some details if you want on this, Ned, but like he did describe kind of like a younger looking man, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
So that I might have to circle a little bit back to that because that's I know that doesn't fit with like sort of like the mainstream view of the Zodiac killer being somebody in his 30s and 40s, and we'll definitely have to talk about age here in a little bit, but like I'm still trying to stick to somewhat of a timeline. So he mails like these 3 letters, mind you, with what I think is a little bit of a slightly trolling thing of like Franklin D. Roosevelt stamps, a total of 8 stamps total if you count them. So there's like four on one envelope, 4 on another, and then 2. So for a total of 8 stamps. He wants these ciphers to be printed on 8/1, which is August 1st, which will feel free to ask me anything, but I think that this is where you see his OCD, particularly with numbers coming into play. Is like I believe that there's sort of like some indication that like there's um, uh, some sort of obsession with some of these numbers,
Well, you
right?
said feel free to ask me anything. I have loads of questions. Ready for one?
Yeah, yeah. Shoot.
Now, this is just something that you talked about very briefly, and you're saying that, the whereabouts can't necessarily be confirmed, but you
Right.
did state that he was working as a truck driver, like a long-haul truck driver. And did I understand what you were saying? You're kind of like laying out the framework like that
Yes.
this
Yeah.
has been the
Hmm.
way that he was getting from, Alabama to California and to Louisiana. He's
Yeah,
driving
and
around as a
yeah,
trucker.
yeah. So that I got that info from like there's like a leader of the neo Nazis called James Mason. Mason wrote a book, and in that book he had described in late '69 that he knew Joseph Paul Franklin, and that Joseph Paul Franklin had told him at that time in late '69 that he had been to James Mason's home state, quote unquote, many times because he was trucking. Well, I had never heard any other indication that Joseph Paul Franklin was a trucker. So if that's what he told James Mason, and so what I'm wondering, like what I could never figure out is, wait a minute, that's a different story than what he told his ex-wife. He told his ex-wife that he was off doing secret agent things. Why didn't he just say that he was trucking? Right?
Well, that's hardly the same impact. I mean, if you're going to tell some type of braggadocious story, I was a trucker versus I was a secret agent. I can only wonder the way these ego-driven people operate.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've never been able to sort of get that story straight. Um, but um, but basically, what I think happened is he's telling different people different things just to cover his tracks, which is exactly what he did in later years. He concocted a whole bunch of lies, basically, right?
And
So,
for the audience, oh, excuse me, I thought you were finished.
oh no, go ahead, I'm done. Yeah,
And I was just saying, for the audience, the book that Sam was talking about is called Siege by James Mason. He was the leader of Atomwaffen. I have an
yeah,
episode about him. There are more than 2,000 episodes of Black Box Online Radio. Some of the older Black Box recordings got into this material purely from an academic perspective. And if anybody is curious about these different stories, I invite you to hit the like button and subscribe, as well as check out some of the previous interviews that Sam and I have done about Joseph Paul Franklin. Just feel free to explore some content here on Black Box Online Radio. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it back to Sam.
okay, yeah. Thanks for that, Ned. And so let's get into the some of my observations that I think point a little bit into like a Nazi ideology in the Z408. So now we get into the Z408. So like I said, so it's got, a total of 8 stamps, 4, 4, and 2. There's 8 stamps. So we have the Z408, which is oddly like comprised of exactly 100 words. I don't know if you've ever sat down and counted like the exact number of words in there, but it's I counted 100, right? So
No, I've never counted the words.
you what?
I have not.
Yeah, and once we get into the Z340, I want to tell you some other very interesting things too. Um, so like I've always thought that these ciphers are a little bit they're so perfectly constructed, right? So starting off with you've got the Z408, and I'll tell you why the number 18 like pops up in the significance of that. So constructed this cipher is constructed of exactly 100 words with like 18 undeciphered characters, which originally I thought that somehow would break into somehow Joseph Paul Franklin, but I've never been able to do that. Oddly enough, his birth name, if you take off the junior, is also 18 characters. So I've often thought it could either be James Clayton Vaughan or like it could be Joseph Paul Franklin. So now we've got a cipher that's exactly 100 words, 8 lines sent to each newspaper. So it's 3 sections comprised of 8 lines.
And one more time, I would like to thank Sam Fisher for appearing on Black Box Online Radio's Zodiac Monday, and I hope that everyone will approach Joseph Paul Franklin with an open mind, as well as give some honest criticisms. If you disagree with Sam's observations, let us know in the comment section down below, and I hope everyone will be polite about it. And also, if you think that Sam is making some good points, let us know as well. Please drop your ideas in the comment section, and you guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there is Black Box Online Radio's Facebook page and BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram. This show is available for free downloads anywhere you get your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, and Spotify, under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And I will be with you tomorrow for an episode about JonBenet Ramsey. Goodbye.